This is Tim.
And Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo. How's everything going?
So far so good. I mean, I kind of feel 2017 so far has been probably one of the more interesting years.
Yeah.
Recent memory for me, and I guess for the world as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I put out a call for comics to talk about on this show because we didn't have any queue. Well, I got two. We're going to talk about one of them today. And this is actually the return of one that we talked about before.
Yeah.
In Critiquing Comics number 63 that came out in June 2014, we talked about this comic called The Demon Archives. The writer is Daniel Sharp, and most of the art is by Sebastian Piriz, but there are some guest artists sometimes. He noticed my message on Twitter about, send us comics to critique, and he said, would you like to take a look at where we are now? Because so much has come out in the past 3 years. So I said, sure, okay. So at the time, when we did episode 63, they were in chapter 4 of the comic, and now they're up to like chapter 12, I think he said. I had time to just barely get into chapter 10. And I had to start from the beginning because I couldn't remember much of anything about the comic. So
that's several hundred pages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot more than I normally read for critiquing comics, because we always say we'll read about 30 pages or more if we're interested. But I felt like in this case, I couldn't really be effective without reading that much. I'd just be rereading what I did before and then, okay, 30 pages, which would kind of miss the point. So,
well, I hate to say it, but I missed the point.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much did you look at?
I looked at maybe the first 10 or so pages to kind of refresh my memory, but it was a mild blur, or I should say faint blur. And then I read the last 30 pages. So I guess chapter from chapter 11 to the end.
Okay.
Maybe 30, 32 pages. But
okay, well, that's something I didn't read, so that might have different takes here, but
yeah, probably. But anyway, yeah. So
okay, so where we read before 3 years ago, so it's a post-apocalyptic world, and these guys, I guess they're soldiers, and they have these special robotic suits, and the main character, Tenzin, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Dorje? I don't know how to pronounce that J. It looks kind of Scandinavian. But he has, well, they all have some kind of AI in their suits, but his is a much more advanced AI, who he refers to as Jane. And she has a particular, she there's a picture of her. We can see kind of what she looks like as a woman. And they're in this the battle with what turns out to be a robot that kills practically his whole set of troops. And he is also gravely injured, and he's in a coma, and Chapter 4 is spent with him in a coma and conveniently dreaming of his past to give us a flashback. And I think we were somewhere in the middle of that flashback that was as far as they were when we did the earlier podcast. And so it seemed to me kind of the story hadn't even really started yet from what I read after that. Although, well, in chapter 5, it was like Jane had to kind of interface with him to get him out of the coma, because it turned out he was sort of stubbornly refusing to come out of it. And then, I don't know, then we get into chapter 7. He's lost an arm and a leg. And so he's kind of adjusting to that. And then chapter 7, we get some new characters, and it starts to feel like this is going to be a really long and complex narrative, if you're up for that. And I don't know. I mean, it looks like they are kind of building an audience, and and that's great, of course. And people are commenting a lot in the notes at the bottom, and they're doing about as well as this podcast is on Patreon, which is okay. So they're getting some attention, but I don't know. I felt like it was a little long-winded. I was kind of feeling like, well, let's get to it. It's moving at a soap opera pace. Like 5 days a week soap opera, especially in the old days when people didn't have the ability to record it, and they would go really slow so you wouldn't miss very much if you missed a day.
Yeah.
I don't know. How did you feel about it?
I felt that long-windedness as well, but just out of curiosity, what's the publishing schedule on this?
Well, let's see. Right now I'm looking at chapter 10, page 4, which came out May 23rd, 2016. The next page came out on the 26th. And the next page came out on the 30th. So it looks like about twice a week.
Okay. For twice a week, I can kind of see why they wrote it this way. The problem is if everybody's reading in real time, you want to give them enough to come back. So you've actually got to pack a lot into that one page. Story-wise, there's going to be 1 or 2 pages where it's like, okay, nothing happened on this page, but that's kind of rare, I felt. And it kind of raises an interesting question with this kind of comic. Now, I'm obviously not going to be the first here to ask this question, but what is the best way to handle this kind of thing? Should you dump pages at once and have a tight kind of chapter dropped all at the same time, all on Netflix, or should you post 1 page a day, but what was it, 1 page or 2 pages a week, but slow down the storyline so people can have kind of this plotting story to push through. I think if you read it in real time, it may be a much better experience than reading it all at once. And I think that's where the writer made his decision.
So it works better like coming back on whatever it is, Tuesday and Friday or whatever, and seeing what the latest page is.
Yeah, I think very much it's structured that way. I don't think the writing is incompetent, and I don't think that the story or the ideas, as far as I know them, because I did read very lightly, I don't think that they're bad, and they've developed a community. So obviously they have fans who are down for it. But I think it's a real-time comic that you have to kind of keep up with in real time. Or you've got to be someone who's really into a heavy read. Because, yeah, it does move very, very slowly.
Hmm.
But if we're looking at 200 pages, I don't know, it looks like 25 pages a chapter. We got 12 chapters.
Yeah, some chapters are longer than others, but
Okay. Well, I'm just going on chapter 11, but the at even at 25 pages a chapter, um, you've got a lot of ground there, and there's something in me, in my sense of storytelling, that needs a an endpoint, a visible endpoint.
hmm.
And to be honest, I couldn't see it here, because we start with an action comic, and then it turns into a medical drama during his coma.
And like I said about chapter 5, at that point I thought, okay, so the story is going to be Jane kind of being in his head, and is that like how the story is going to? That's going to be the heart of the story. But then 6 or 7, no, actually it wasn't. So I'm still not quite sure what the real story is here, other than, well, Tenzin has this tendency to blame himself. Like everybody in his life has died, and he blames himself for all that, which
Yeah.
is a concept. It's not really a story. So I'm not sure yet,
Well,
10 chapters in, what the story is.
in chapter 12, it becomes a courtroom drama.
Okay.
So this kind of switch up is better served by breaking it into books.
Hmm.
Like book 1 is the action story. Book 2 is the cerebral mindfuck of his coma experience, and the third book is the courtroom drama. If you want to divide it up that way, I mean, maybe that's not his plan. Maybe he has a plan that we just can't see. But from what I'm seeing here, the reason why it is long-winded is because the main focus here is to kind of Days of Our Lives continue this
Hmm.
drama with these characters and this situation. That's the mandate, it seems.
Hmm.
I mean, it's beautifully drawn, beautifully painted, I should say, and it does have its own sense of pacing and storytelling and style that are all well thought out. But plotting here doesn't seem to be quite focused.
Yeah, it's a little meandering.
Yeah, that would be the word, meandering. Um, and so the question is, what kind of comic is this? Now, I should point to something else that's just kind of coming up in my mind. I watched a movie the other day called Passengers.
I think I've heard about this. Remind me what that is.
Okay, it's what's her name and what's his fuck?
Oh yeah, them.
Yeah, fuck, I can't remember her name. She played Katniss in fuck. I'm becoming such an old man. I can't remember shit.
Oh, I should. Is that Jennifer Lawrence?
Thank you. Yes, Jennifer Lawrence. And what's his name from the Guardians of the Galaxy?
Oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Jennifer,
we're two old guys who don't live in America. And
yeah, not bombarded with the commercials, so it's not really. He's not really on my mind so much. But anyway, those two characters are on a ship with 5,000 other people.
oh, Chris Pratt.
Yeah, Chris Pratt. Thank you. So they're on a ship headed to another planet in some sort of cryostasis, and there's malfunction which wakes them up. And
Oh yeah. Okay.
basically, it's set in a sci-fi situation, but in fact is not a science fiction story. It's actually a love story.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of realized this 2/3 of the way through the film. I understand the problems of being in that situation, but there's no reason why that couldn't take place on a desert island, or a deserted island, or just anywhere but space. It didn't have to be in space. Some problems, but I mean, with the spaceship, but really, it didn't have to be that. And so for this one, does this one have to be what it is? Because we have so far 3 separate genres here, kind of crammed into this one
So far,
soap opera of a comic.
so what? War and technology and courtroom.
Yeah, and so my question is, well, what kind of comic is it? What is it exactly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's becoming less clear as it goes on.
Yeah, and I think I do not remember what our first thoughts were on this, because it was 3 years ago. I was a younger, more spry man. But yeah, it fails me.
Memory.
Do you remember what we said?
I listened to it yesterday.
That's a long time ago, man.
Yeah, I know.
You did mention that we had said at the time that it was long-winded.
Yeah, we did talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. My thing is,
I think, well, one thing was that we thought that, that it had a lot of common tropes in it, and yet it was somewhat enjoyable to read in spite of those kind of, that even with the repetitive tropes, it worked, as a kind of science fiction war story.
Sure.
But and that was just reading, that initial battle scene, basically.
Yeah. That's the point, though. It was something a little bit more singular then. Now it's got all this extra stuff, and don't know that it necessarily needs to have it.
Yeah, and then when what was it, Chapter 7, when all those new characters came in, I was thinking, oh no, is this going to be like Bleach? The manga, which started out great, first couple volumes were really enjoyable, and then, much worse than this. It just, the writer just started piling on new characters, and they didn't really mean anything. You couldn't keep track of them. One guy was introduced and immediately murdered, and I didn't care because I didn't know anything about him. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but it wasn't that bad. But when you throw in more characters, I realized, okay, now the scope is starting to expand a little more than I really expected or wanted, and I felt like it was starting to kind of expand too much.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't even recognize that there were new characters in. I just read the little bit at the beginning and then read the tail end. And yeah, to be honest, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But I was kind of felt like, well, what is this about? Mm-hmm. And listening to your description, okay, my assumptions based on what I read necessarily wrong, and that is either an unfortunate part of just the chapter that I read, chapter 11, or it's just bad planning. But yeah, one of the things about Japanese comics, and I'm assuming about this comic as well, is that if it's going well, you'll want to continue. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast before, and maybe it's a famous enough story that everybody knows it already, but Dragon Ball was originally just one ball.
And it was originally a comedy.
But sure. Originally a comedy, and there was originally one ball. But when he finished the story arc and they got the Dragon's Ball. The editor just said, "What the fuck are you doing? You've got a hit. You need to continue." So he made more balls.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that leads to the question: how many balls does the dragon have? As many as the reader can stand. So in this story, it sounds like it's being, or it feels like it's being pulled outward to maintain an audience that it's built. Maybe that was the plan all along, because it was pretty slow moving from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And surely this is not the first comic of these creators. I mean, the level of ability of the creators is much higher than a first time comic creator could muster. Mm. So I don't know. I maybe it was on purpose, but if that's the case, I'm feeling this comic is not quite for me.
Mm-hmm. A couple of small points. When we did it the first time, I was wondering, why was it called Demon Archives? Mm-hmm. And somewhere around chapter 5 or 6, well, and in fact, I also saw in the About page, it kind of goes into it, but they're talking about, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Daemon, Daemon, which is a computer subroutine. Mm. So I don't know that much about it. I've seen that word before, but something IT related, and related to Jane, the AI. Mm. And so, but because people would recognize Demon more likely than they'd recognize Daemon, they called it the Demon Archives. Mm. The other point is that the way that Jane is drawn, I think because there are several guest artists, her look changes quite a bit. Mm. And at one point around maybe chapter 6 or 7, I was like, is that Jane? Kind of looks like her, but I wasn't quite sure at first. Mm. There's not quite enough consistency between artists in how they're drawing her. Mm. So something to kind of watch. But I feel like her hairstyle keeps changing, and kind of even her color scheme is changing. So, and kind of even like the shape of her face wasn't the same. So
Jane is a computer hologram, so I suppose it's
yeah, I suppose that would be the way to explain it. Well, she's not a real person, so she changes how she looks at will.
I don't know. If I were a guest artist coming in on this, yeah, I would have a different style of drawing, and maybe some people would have some issues with the characters, the way they look. I mean, based on a thing, but not quite the thing. Mm-hmm. It's like an actor replacing another actor in a series or a movie. Mm-hmm. It's like if they suddenly replaced Harrison Ford with someone else who was younger, just so they could continue the profit margin.
They'd never do that. Oh wait, they did. Well, except I don't think they ever made any more movies after that. Who was it? Shia LaBeouf they were trying to put in his place?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the young Han Solo movie that just started filming.
Oh, that Harrison Ford role. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, Shia LaBeouf was roundly hated, and Shia said, okay, I'm not going to do another one of these. Mm. Harrison Ford saying he's going to do another movie, but whatever, man. I've had my fun. At this point, I don't care. I'll have fun on other projects and new IPs as well. I don't need to keep going back to Harrison Ford. But anyway, man, yeah. Any final thoughts on the comic?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's certainly competently done. It's just, I think it just needs a little bit more focus, from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, well, that is the thing. Is it exactly for us, or the average reader, or not? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, some people are buying into it, and obviously you can't please everybody. So, no matter
yeah.
how good it is.
But I did want to ask one question, because to a certain extent you created a similar type of comic.
Spider-Hag is something like
Yes,
this.
Spider Hag. Well, no, there's an arc
Well, I
of.
mean, yeah, my spider, yeah, I see the similarity. Yeah, they both kind of go on and on.
Well, I didn't mean it quite like that. More in the sense of, um, Spider Hag. I think was a passion comic that, you had something you wanted to say and you were in the middle of saying it. It just took you years. How many
Hmm.
years?
Well, I worked on it through junior high and high school off and on. Didn't really work on it during college. Spent several months on it after college. Then came to Japan and blew it off for like 15 years almost. And then when I brought it back, I was working on it consistently for close to 5 years.
Now, the interesting
Um,
thing about Spider Hag, though, and which is different from this comic, is that it takes place over like one day.
yeah, a lot of that was all in the same day, but I kept I had so many different characters that I had to check in on
Yeah,
that made it take a long time to get through a day.
yeah. Well, I mean, that for me that was quite interesting. It's longer than a Jack Bauer day, but, the, this one has, that pacing, but, it's not a comedy. The point isn't making a joke, as yours was. I mean, to a certain extent, you could say, except for the seasonal bits about peanuts, all of that could take place in one day as well. Um,
Hmm.
but this one seems to be morphing into different types of comics, and there's a similarity there. I'm not exactly sure where I was going with it anymore, but there's a similarity there. But, I think having it all take place in one day, or having all of the characters be kind of fixed, um, is a little bit more of a thing that I could get into, with a comic that is never ending. Um, Kind of like a situation comedy.
Hmm.
Um, the goofy guy and the two girls that have to live together. Um, I think I made this
Yeah,
analogy.
yeah, we talked about Three's Company before, or
Yeah.
Bosom Buddies, one or the other.
Well, I think I confused Bosom Buddies with Three's Company. But
Yeah.
anyway, the point being that setup, in fact, it worked out that, if one of them left, they would just simply replace that character with a similar type of character.
Yeah.
When, what was her name?
Yes, when Suzanne Summers left.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they got another blonde.
Forgot her name, but yeah, another blonde. Hmm.
Yeah, and that was it. But, yeah, this one actually has movement and growth and development, and so it needs to have end as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Spider-Hag was going to have end too, but I got too busy with podcasting, so
Well, I guess it ended.
yeah, it ended without ending.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got an email. Now, actually, Paul Spence sent two emails. He sent one to Deconstructing Comics, which I read in the past episode of Deconstructing Comics, and then he wrote another one to Critiquing Comics. So he says, thanks for reading my comments from the Facebook page regarding Yiffing in Hell on episode 104 of Critiquing Comics. Yeah, I read that message from him then. I subscribe to writer John Lees, his newsletter, and he addresses the key point that I made in my comments, that it is necessary for a creator to know what ideas, emotions, or themes he or she wants to express in a work. He discusses this with respect to comic writing, quoting, "I have talked before and will likely talk about it again in more length here in future about how my approach to writing is intensely structural. I will write chapter plans, then I will write scene plans, and then I will write page plans. On those page plans, I will write what happens on each page in a single bullet-pointed line, trying to ensure every page has a purpose. Once I've written the script, I try to go back through it page by page to make sure none of these pages are wasted or redundant, that they all do something useful. That can be advancing the plot, or it can be adding nuance to a character, ideally both. But if that page isn't serving its function or not doing it well enough, I have to be ruthless and either rewrite it or give it the chop." And Paul says, "This advice is something all comic creators should follow, not just the creator of Yiffing in Hell." I think we have just about exhausted the subject of Yiffing in Hell at this point. It has been a worthwhile discussion because it has enabled listeners and hopefully creators to understand some of the fundamental components of good storytelling. Yeah, you could learn about it by seeing its absence.
Actually, that's very well put, and I totally agree. I never do that myself, and I have had to chop a lot of things after I'd already spent months drawing them.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened to me several times, and that's the thing. I'm more of an artist than a writer. I just like to jump in and start drawing. So a lot of times I don't know where the story's going, and I'm kind of making it up as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like structure, and I do like to have some sort of focus or direction with where I'm going. I don't always find it in the first couple of pages, but once I find it, I try to go there pretty directly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very well put.
Yeah. And then one other point to talk about today. Way back in Critiquing Comics 38 in December 2012, we talked about a comic by Nick Dupree, who lived in New York. Mulele and I had both hoped to meet him at different points, and it never happened.
I tried in 2012 when I went to New York Comic Con.
Yeah, and I tried in 2014 during Tim Across America, but it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And just this past week, Nick passed away. Mulele happened to find out.
Yeah, I just came across a post on Facebook saying that he had passed. I forget exactly who made the announcement.
Well, yeah, I checked it too. Yeah, a lot of people were posting on his Facebook wall, R.I.P. and so forth.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about why it was significant that he was doing a comic. And he had some kind of illness that made it difficult for him to, move, didn't it?
Yeah. Looking at one of the posts on his brother's page, actually, it says that he was diagnosed with forgive my pronunciation if I'm wrong here, but mitochondrial disease in the early 80s. And basically he lost some mobility, and he had some sort of spinal surgery when he was a kid, which went horribly wrong.
I see. And
left him basically quadriplegic. But he did have the ability to move a bit. He basically made comics using a mouse on his computer. And his main thing was he was a writer, and we reviewed his comic.
Yeah, Bunnies in Space.
Yeah, which, to be honest, I can't quite remember the comic, but I remember liking the comic, and I remember liking Nick, and being quite impressed by the level of ability that he had as an artist, as a writer. I mean, he was also fine. The thing is, there are a lot of people here who submit comics who really have not taken the time to discipline themselves as Nick did to make his comics. I understand that he started making comics to help deal with the fact that he was, wheelchair-ridden, bedridden in his childhood. And his mother was also an art teacher of sorts, although I'm not exactly sure of the details. But apparently he was also a bit famous in that he... sorry, I'm lacking words here. He formed a campaign called Nick's Crusade, and reading from the website here, which resulted in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services making a special program for Nick and 29 other ventilator-dependent individuals in Alabama to continue getting in-home care after they turn 21. You can read up about that at nickscrusade.org. But apparently quite respected in the community of people who are on ventilators. So, I mean, the stuff about his disability or his other activities, or even the fact that he had a brother, it was never anything that he mentioned to us. And so we really didn't know him outside of a simple email saying, here, check out my comic. I have to say, I really do respect that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to meet Nick.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you'd like us to critique your comic, or you just want to send us some comments, send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of a comic as a PDF or a webcomic, and then we'll talk about it on the show. So till next time, this is Tim.
And Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. Just getting ready to post this, I found that NPR did a story on Nick Dupree's passing. I'll link to it from the show notes on our site, as well as to his comics site and to our earlier review of his work. Also, links to the Demon Archives and our earlier review of it. On Twitter, I'm at Decon Comics, and Mulele is at Mulele Redux. Our site is deconstructingcomics.com, and from there you can link to us on other social media and support us with a monthly Patreon donation or by using our link to make your Amazon purchases. Thanks for listening.